It was around 9 at night. Nothing special about it. Just one of those casual places where people go because it's easy and then no one has to explain themselves. We'd already been sitting there a while, talking about work and dumb stuff, when someone suggested adding one more thing. Not a big thing, just a little extra. The kind of thing that doesn't even feel like a decision. Everyone nodded. I nodded too. I remember feeling relieved that nobody hesitated. That was the whole point. No pause, no awkward silence, no one looking at the menu a second longer than necessary. I didn't think about the price. I didn't need to. It wasn't expensive enough to argue with, and it wasn't cheap enough to feel proud of. It just felt normal. Like this is what people do at this age. In this place, at this hour. I paid, smiled, kept listening, and it wasn't until later, when the night had already passed, that I realized I never even asked myself if I wanted it. I just wanted to belong to the moment. That's usually how it shows up for me. Not as a big splurge, not as something reckless or dramatic. It's the small upgrades that sneak in because they smooth everything over. One nicer option instead of the basic one extra add-on because everyone else is getting it. A few dollars here to avoid being the odd one out. I used to tell myself it was nothing. $5, $10. That's not a money problem, right? But those moments stack up in a way that's hard to feel in real time. They're spaced out just enough that each one feels harmless on its own. And because they're social, they come with this built-in excuse. It's not spending, it's participating. It's not pressure, it's just how things are done. I didn't question it because questioning it would have meant slowing things down. And slowing things down felt worse than paying a little more. So I kept paying quietly without noticing how often it was happening. Food is where I notice it the most. Group food. Sitting around a table, menus open, everyone's scanning the same few items. Someone orders a drink, then another. Then it feels strange not to. I've ordered things I didn't really want just because everyone else did. Not because I was hungry. Not because it sounded amazing. Just because it felt easier than explaining why I wasn't. When I'm alone, I'm suddenly very practical. I know exactly what's worth it and what isn't. But in a group, that part of my brain goes quiet. I tell myself it's about the experience. About not breaking the rhythm. I've even called it generosity before, like I was being relaxed or easygoing. But later, when I look at the receipt, it's always higher than I expected. Not shocking. Just high enough to make me pause. And that pause usually comes when I'm by myself again, replaying the night and wondering how many times I've paid extra just to avoid a moment of silence. Subscriptions are a different version of the same thing. Nobody hands you a menu. Nobody watches you decide. You sign up because someone mentioned it, or because it's part of the group chat now, or because everyone's talking about this show, this app, this service. It's only $12, or $15, or $9. That number is small enough to feel responsible. I remember telling myself I'd cancel later. I always do. Later is when it stops being awkward. Later is when nobody notices, but later turns into months without me realizing it. The charge just sits there quietly renewing, quietly proving that I valued staying in the loop more than I valued paying attention. What makes it uncomfortable isn't the amount. It's realizing how easy it was to stop looking. I didn't forget how much it cost. I just stopped asking whether it was still worth being included. Clothes were never about style for me. They were about not standing out. I'd walk into a room and suddenly feel underdressed, even if nobody said anything. So I'd fix it later. One nicer jacket, a better pair of shoes, something that signaled I belonged there. I called it upgrading. I told myself it was confidence. But confidence that comes with a receipt doesn't last very long. The feeling wears off faster than the fabric. And then you're left with the charge, sitting there, justified in your head as a one-time thing. I've said that sentence more times than I can count. Just this once? Just to feel settled. Just to match the room. And every time I believed it. Not because it was true, but because it sounded reasonable enough to move on without thinking about it again. Transportation is sneaky like that too. Paying extra to avoid being late, paying extra to avoid looking cheap, rides instead of buses, parking instead of walking, Convenience stacked on top of convenience until the total barely feels connected to the original choice. I used to frame it as efficiency. My time is valuable, that was the line. But sometimes it wasn't about time at all. It was about not wanting to be the person who made things harder. Not wanting to be the one who said, actually, let's do the cheaper option. So I'd take the faster, smoother, more expensive route and tell myself it made sense. And in the moment, it did. It always does. It's only later, when I'm tired and looking at my bank account, that I realize how often easier just meant more expensive, and how rarely I question that trade. Credit cards make all of this quieter. There's no pause, no physical reminder, just a smooth swipe that keeps the conversation going. I've used credit to be polite, to keep the night moving, to avoid doing math in public. I didn't think of it as debt in those moments. I thought of it as future me's problem. Future me, it turns out, is always there, waiting, carrying the balance, paying interest on nights that felt casual and harmless. What's uncomfortable is admitting that I knew this, at least on some level. I just preferred delayed discomfort over immediate awkwardness. I preferred the clean ending to the night over the messier ending to the month. And once I realized that pattern, it got harder to pretend the card was neutral. It wasn't helping me spend. It was helping me fit in. Rent was the biggest version of this for me. Not the place itself, but the feeling attached to it. What kind of place people expected me to live in. What felt normal for my age, my job, my circle. I remember stretching my budget because everyone else seemed to be doing fine with it. That should have been my first clue. I told myself it was temporary, that my income would catch up, that this was just the cost of being in the right place. And technically, I could afford it. That was the argument I kept coming back to. But affording something and feeling okay about it aren't the same thing. Month after month, the payment went out, and month after month, I felt a low-level stress I couldn't quite name. It wasn't panic, it was pressure. The quiet kind that settles in and starts to feel normal. At some point, I finally did the math. Not in a spreadsheet, just on a piece of paper. The extra drinks. The subscriptions I barely used. The slightly nicer options. Let's say it averaged out to about $40 a week. That number didn't scare me at first. $40 is nothing, right? But $40 a week is over $2,000 a year. And when I saw that number written down, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt heavy, like I'd been carrying something without realizing it had weight. $2,000 isn't life-changing. It's not catastrophic. It's just big enough to matter, big enough to notice, big enough to make me wonder how many years I'd been paying it without calling it what it was. This is the part I didn't want to look at first. Not the numbers themselves, but the reason behind them. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't inflation. It wasn't that I was careless. It was that I kept choosing belonging over awareness, over and over. And I did it so smoothly that it never felt like a choice. What made it uncomfortable was realizing how often I'd frame that choice as being easygoing. It's being flexible, as being fun. I like that version of myself. The one who didn't make money a thing. But money was already a thing. I just wasn't letting it speak out loud. And when I finally sat with that, there was this quiet sense of embarrassment. Not shame. Just the feeling that I'd been lying to myself in small, polite ways. Social media didn't help. Not because it told me to spend, but because it normalized spending without context. Trips, dinners, upgrades, experiences. Everyone looked relaxed about it. Nobody posted the after part. The bill. The month where things felt tight for no clear reason, I'd scroll and feel this low hum of comparison. Not envy exactly, more like pressure to keep pace. And then I'd spend in ways that lined up with that feeling. Not intentionally, just subtly. What bothered me later was how automatic it became. I wasn't chasing luxury, I was chasing normal. And normal, it turns out, can be pretty expensive when you don't know whose version of it you're following. Gifts were another quiet one. Birthdays, weddings, holidays. There's an unspoken range you're supposed to hit. Too low feels embarrassing. Too high feels performative. So you aim for the middle and tell yourself it's just what people do. I've spent money on gifts while quietly resenting the expectation behind them. That resentment didn't show up right away. It came later, when the credit card bill arrived, or when another event popped up sooner than expected. I realized I wasn't upset about the giving. I was upset about the pressure to give in a specific way, to match a standard I never agreed to out loud. And once again, the money wasn't the loud part. The feeling was. Trips and weekends were the same pattern on a larger scale. Someone suggests something. You say yes before thinking, because saying yes feels good. It feels like momentum. You don't want to be the reason plans slow down. I've come home from weekends away feeling both relaxed and weirdly stressed. That's a confusing combination. You're supposed to feel refreshed, not financially tense. But when I looked back, I realized I'd agreed to things without checking what they actually cost me. Not just money, energy, peace. The stress didn't come from the trip itself. It came from realizing I'd paid for it emotionally long after it was over. Work made it trickier. Lunches, coffees, after-work drinks. There's a culture to it, even when nobody says it out loud. I didn't want to seem difficult. I didn't want to opt out too often. So I'd go along and tell myself it was networking or morale or just part of the job. And maybe some of it was. But some of it was just habit. Expensive habit. One that blended into my workday so seamlessly that I stopped seeing it as spending at all. It was just work life. And the line between professional and personal money blurred in a way that made it hard to tell what I was actually choosing versus what I was just absorbing. Family was different, heavier. There are traditions and expectations there that go back longer than any budget. Certain things are just done a certain way. Certain amounts are expected. I didn't want to question that. It felt disrespectful. So I didn't. I paid. I adjusted. I told myself it was fine. And mostly it was, until it wasn't. Until the pattern repeated enough times that I started feeling boxed in by obligations I never talked about. It wasn't anger. It was confusion. Trying to figure out where generosity ended and pressure began, and realizing I'd never really drawn that line for myself. There was also the version of me I wanted to be seen as stable, established, doing okay. I bought things that supported that image. Not flashy things, just enough to signal I had it together. I didn't think of it as insecurity, I thought of it as progress. But progress that relies on spending has a strange, hollow feeling to it. The relief is quick, the doubt lasts longer. I'd feel good walking out of the store and then slightly uneasy later, like I'd skipped a step somewhere, like I was paying for an identity instead of building one. That thought took a while to form. And once it did, it was hard to ignore. After a while, the fatigue sets in. Not from one big mistake, but from hundreds of small ones that never felt like mistakes at the time. You start feeling anxious without knowing why. Your money feels tight even though nothing dramatic happened. That's when I realized how much energy fitting in actually costs. It's not just dollars, it's attention. It's the constant low-level negotiation between what feels easy socially and what feels sustainable personally. When you always choose the easy option, you don't notice the toll until you're already tired. I ran another number one night, smaller this time. Just $40 a month, that's it. That's what I told myself. But $40 a month is almost $500 a year. Over 10 years, that's $5,000. For something I barely remembered enjoying. Seeing it that way didn't make me angry, it made me quiet. $5,000 isn't a disaster. It's just enough to represent a lot of moments where I chose comfort over clarity. Moments I can't even remember clearly anymore. What makes this tricky is that opting out doesn't feel clean or brave. It feels awkward. It feels like explaining yourself when nobody asked. Awareness doesn't magically fix that. Even now, I still catch myself slipping into old patterns. I still feel that pull. The difference is that I notice it more. And noticing doesn't solve the discomfort. It actually adds to it at first. Because now there's a split second where I see the choice happening. And in that second, I realize how often I've avoided it. The number that sticks with me isn't the big one, it's the small one. The $10 here, the $20 there, the amount that feels too insignificant to fight over. Add those up across a year, across a few years, across a decade, and they start to feel less harmless. Not dramatic, not catastrophic, just quietly heavy. Like something you didn't realize you were carrying until you stopped for a second and felt it in your hands